What if everything that you thought you knew about human spaceflight was incomplete? Have you ever heard about Project Solar Warden? Solar Warden? Is that like a guardian of the sun or something? Well, sort of. It's been reported for years to be a super secret classified U.S. Navy space fleet up there that started in the 1980s. Are you intrigued? If we've not met before, my name's Joe and welcome to Beyond Theory. In this episode, I'm inviting you to join me for a deep dive into the Solar Warden investigation so you can explore and discover facts beyond the explained. Now, please do subscribe and share this video. Click the notification bell. That way, when YouTube isn't messing with us, you get the notification. Get your spacesuits on. Get in your little secret space shuttle and let's get ready to blast off. We're going to get into the deep dive. Back a few years ago, it was reported that Solar Warden consisted of a group of military space motherships. About 8 or so, and a collection of accompanying scout ships, usually numbered around 40 to 50. The mission, so it seems, of the Solar Warden fleet is safeguarding our solar system from alien invasion, in case you're wondering what they've been doing up there. Now, this might sound like science fiction, but you and I both know that the United States, Russian, and Chinese militaries have always had a presence in space from the very beginning. That's where the space programs originated, for crying out loud. So this might seem like science fiction, but let's also keep in mind that all of these different military space programs, U.S., the Soviets, and the Chinese, today, I would argue, model their technologies after science fiction stories. NASA employed Wernher von Braun, who wrote a non-fiction science fiction story about human missions to Mars using technology available way back then. And NASA hired Wernher von Braun. You need to check out some of those other videos if you're interested in that topic. Because on this channel, we've done some videos in all these areas, and we will continue to, for you. I'm going to link, by the way, to that military space research playlist at the end of this video. Whether classified space programs are up there because of an alien threat or something else is really up for debate. But that's the claim with Solar Warden. But how did we get here? How did we find out about this super secret program? It turns out that tracing the origins of the Solar Warden story is a little bit more complicated than you might expect. And getting into this rabbit hole, it became more complicated than I expected to. See, I've been looking into Project Solar Warden for a while now, well over a year. In fact, I've done 4 Freedom of Information Act requests to 4 different agencies for any records at all, that have any mention of Solar Warden. Any mention of Solar Warden. Each request comes back with different results. No, they all come back with the same results. This request on your screen, Department of the Navy, Fleet Forces Command, I asked them, give me any and all available information, documents, photographs, data, as well as mission purpose, operations, and flight and crew manifests containing or referring to Solar Warden and any other off-planet space fleet ships, blueprints / schematics, and related data, as well as information pertaining to, get this one, because I'm looking into it, military exploration of other planets. So I wanted to throw the whole ball of wax at the Department of the Navy, because that's who supposedly this Solar Warden thing was being run by, what we're told. How about this one? Over here, Defense Technical Information Center. Asked them for the same thing. They categorized my request as other, searched through the records, and found nothing on Solar Warden. How about this one? On NASA. Office of Communications. Headquarters. Give me all available information, documents, photographs, data, etc., etc. Flight and crew manifest concerning Solar Warden. Didn't have anything. So then I'm like, all right, well, who's the other person that we could ask? Who's the other organization that we could ask? And I came up with the Department of Defense. I figured, well, I struck out in these other places. Let's go Department of Defense. So U.S. Stratcom, United States Strategic Command. I thought that would be a pretty good one. What do you think? Who would you FOIA about Solar Warden? Get this. I was really surprised by this. United States Strategic Command tells me in the response a lot of information. Well, number one, they didn't have anything on Solar Warden. They looked at their space component at Vandenberg Air Force Base and didn't have any records. But this FOIA request for Solar Warden to the DOD was the third ever made. And Stratcom tells us that. Your request, is the third request U.S. Strategic Command has received for records pertaining to this subject, Solar Warden. The first one in 2011 and the second in December of 2017. Searches, and then they said they don't have anything, right? I already read you that part. So then I got to wondering, like, even though all these requests are coming back with negative results, you tell me that you know that Solar Warden's up there. I don't know. Somebody told you, you believe it. I believe it. I think. We know that fleet, that secret space program fleet's up there, right? Well, that's where I got to wondering, well, how do I know it? How do you know it? How do I know that Project Solar Warden is real? So I started poking around with the whole thing. Google's your friend, right? Well, this will probably happen to you if you decide to look into Project Solar Warden, and here's why. You just randomly pop into Google Solar Warden. All right, your search is going to return this blog post. See that red arrow up there? Up there, that red arrow? And that's from the Huffington Post. Now, I can't show you the whole article because of copyright restrictions here on YouTube, and we're in compliance with that. It's called Solar Warden, the Secret Space Program, and it's in the top 5 results. So what, right? You search for the information and you got it. Well, again, I can't show you the article, but I can talk to you about it. And if we listen and take a closer kind of examination of this whole process, this article, it does reinforce the claim that Solar Warden's been around for since at least the early 1980s, and that it's supposed to be a secret space fleet. And that's a quote from the article. Thank you, Zen Master Me, for your super chat and for your support. We funnel all of that right into funding the research and making sure that we can continue to produce these videos and having fun together. So thank you very much. We're not interested in making YouTube a business, just to be really have some open disclosure about that. So thank you. Thumbs up to you. I appreciate it. Well, anyway, the author of this top search result for the Project Solar Warden, Darren Perks, discloses that he conducted a FOIA request with the DOD and got a surprising response that seems just short of almost being an admission that Project Solar Warden is real. The response he got says that about an hour ago, I spoke to a NASA rep who confirmed this was their program and it was terminated by the president. He also informed me that it was not a joint program with the DoD. The NASA rep informed me that you should be directed to the Johnson Space Center FOIA manager. So again, this is what's out there in the public world on Solar Warden. This is not some, private researcher like me who takes this stuff seriously, just making YouTube videos. It's like top Google search result, right? Anybody who hears about it's going to see this. So this is I guess we could call it an information vector or an information screen or filter. And this guy in the FOIA request from DOD supposedly says to Mr. Perks, I've ran your request through one of our space-related directorates, and I'm waiting on one other division with the command to respond back to me. I'll contact you once I have a response from the other division, and then, did NASA refer you to us? All right. Now, on the face of it, there's some hope here that NASA's got some information on Solar Warden from Perks' FOIA request in this Huffington Post article. Top Google search result. But the response that Perks got is problematic for a few reasons, and needless to say, ultimately the FOIA request was forwarded to NASA and returned no responsive documents, just like I got back for you. So what does that mean? Well, that means, hey, Buster, keep kicking rocks down the road because we got nothing for you. Nothing. Now, I'm not really concerned so much in this investigation about the truth or fiction of Project Solar Warden because, very important point here, because in order to figure out whether it's real or not, we need to have multiple data points that are interconnected that support each other as foundations in the story. I mean, this is a big, elaborate, super secret space fleet, right? It's elaborate, involves a lot of different organizations, public and private, according to the story. Thank you, Brian, for your super chat. Very much appreciated. We're going to keep that research going. And I do wish everybody abundance, whether you're dealing with terrestrial issues or non-terrestrial officers and black triangles. I 3D printed that one for you, too. Right now, I want to show you something and make a point about evidence and research and investigations and how you and I can base what we know, what we suspect is true about this Solar Warden, on what we want to believe. So back to the story. Once this researcher Perks gets through introducing us to his FOIA requests and the response back on Solar Warden, he starts to tell us about none other than a British citizen named Gary McKinnon. McKinnon is a dude who was charged and arrested in 2002 after spending roughly a year hacking into DoD and NASA computers. Like, confirmed, not BS. Now, the trouble here starts when Mr. Perks in this Huffington Post article tells us when Gary McKinnon hacked into U.S. Space Command computers several years ago and learned of the existence of non-terrestrial officers and fleet-to-fleet transfers and a secret program called Solar Warden, he was charged by the Bush Justice Department with having committed the biggest computer military hack of all time and stood to face prison time of up to 70 years after extradition from the UK. All right, now, listen, before we get too far here, I need to say that I have the utmost level of respect for Mr. Perks and Mr. McKinnon. I've corresponded with Mr. McKinnon. Hey, Gary. So if we're newly coming to the stories of either McKinnon or Solar Warden, Perks gives us, in the Huffington Post article, gives us the understanding that McKinnon discovered evidence, or at least some references to this thing that we all know or have heard about as Solar Warden. This is a pretty big problem because it's really the first clue that something's up with the story. The fact beyond what's already being explained here is that if you look into McKinnon's story, he never mentions Solar Warden. In fact, in a March 13th, 2019 interview with Richard Dolan, who I also respect and appreciate, right around the 10-minute, 49-second mark, McKinnon flat out denies having found any reference to Solar Warden whatsoever, saying, quote, "No, there's so much disinformation." This is when Dolan brings up this whole need to clarify a link between Solar Warden. I mean, I don't know about you, but I thought that that was a pretty gosh darn intelligent disclosure. So see, this puts us in a bit of a pickle. I mean, there it is from the horse's mouth. Gary McKinnon, the guy the U.S. government tried to extradite for hacking their computers, probably to hire him. He's telling you he didn't discover Project Solar Warden. Huh? So where'd it come from? I mean, there is a super secret space fleet up there, right? How did we find out about it? Diving deeper, the evidence trail for Solar Warden goes cold before 2006. The first reference to Solar Warden that I could track down occurred in March of 2006. And according to the Open Minds forum, which was around at the time, and I don't believe that version of the forum is around now, but the administrators of the Open Minds forum revealed the Solar Warden link. And as it turns out, they did some digging around and they traced back the earliest mention of Solar Warden to their excellent forum. And again, thank you for your disclosure on that. And the first mention was in the second post on a thread started May 13th, 06, written by an anonymous poster. And that's pretty much it. That's where the story of Solar Warden starts, that most people in the general public are going to find if they do some digging. Now, if we sort of trace this orbital trajectory, where's my black triangle? If we sort of trace this orbital trajectory of the Solar Warden story, it looks like you first have that Open Minds post on a forum in 2006. Well, later on in May of 2007, Project Camelot publishes an interview with Henry Deacon. Henry Deacon, who mentions Solar Warden. And they interview him. Shucks, who the heck wouldn't interview Henry Deacon? I would interview Henry Deacon, but I can't crack the gosh darn code. So along come a bunch of other researchers, and from that point, they speculate that Solar Warden is linked with Lockheed Martin, secret military spacecraft technologies, and somehow the subject of aliens gets piled into the story, forming this interconnected framework. Boom. And I'm not faulting any researchers for making those kinds of speculations based on their research. That's what research is. That's what we do. But Solar Warden goes from a passing mention on an anonymous post on a now defunct forum, unfortunately, to a fully fleshed Black Ops shadow government secret space operation. You see the issues here? Now, as the years progress along, it becomes more and more difficult to distinguish how the narrative operates. It pretty much becomes a chicken and an egg problem. Which came first? Let me show you what I mean. A man called William Tompkins, for example, credited himself with architecting concepts, drafting concepts for U.S. Navy starships way back in 1956 in his 2015 book, selected by extraterrestrials, right there, which we got on Amazon and paid for it and read the book to bring this to you, okay? So we're not ripping people off. Like, we want to do this right, honorably. Well, here's the thing. It's important to know that William Tompkins, in his book, Selected by Extraterrestrials, never mentions Solar Warden once. He never mentions the name Solar Warden. Instead, he focused his book on providing more details about his extraterrestrial secretary that wears miniskirts. I'm not making this up. Donk, donk. Dun, dun. But then later in October 2016, this guy Tompkins gets referred to as, quote, one of the founders of Solar Warden, unquote. As Tompkins stated that he was recruited as a kid by the Navy to help design these big ships and sit in on planning meetings with a pretty big admiral by the name of Admiral Rico Bata. Originally, Rico Bata is from Australia. That's good. Well, he's got kind of a foreign-sounding name. I want to give a big shout-out to all y'all down there in Australia, down under. But here's the other part about this. After doing a FOIA request on Mr. Tompkins' naval records, which my Patreon members over at the Joe from the Carolinas Patreon page, they have access to that, have had access to it for months. Well, in this FOIA request on Tompkins' naval records, I did that because I wanted to find out more about his work in the U.S. Navy space programs, but all I could find is that he had a 3-year stint, 3 years, in the United States Navy reserves, fixing airplanes on a base out there in San Diego. That's San Diego. He was fresh out of high school, signed in by his father at age 17, so that he wouldn't be sent to the World War II front lines. Okay? This is his naval records now. I didn't believe it. I didn't hear it from somebody. I asked the Navy. We got the documents. We read the documents. That's where we're getting it from. He had no security clearances listed in his naval records, and he was not a particularly good shot when he did his marksman training. So it looks to me like William Tompkins is getting read into this Solar Warden legend after the fact. Because otherwise, I mean, reasonably and rationally and logically, he at least would have mentioned it in his book, right? And I want to be really clear here that Mr. Tompkins and all of the other people out there who have been in the military deserve a great deal of credit and a big thanks for your military service, for Mr. Tompkins' military service. And I want to thank him and you for serving our country, period. But I still want to know about this idea of the secret space fleet. You might be thinking the same thing I am. Maybe Solar Warden isn't the code name. What about that? Oftentimes in government documents that I've been reviewing and will continue to be reviewing for you, there's often 2 code names assigned for a special access program. An unclassified name and a classified name. It's how they keep serious researchers on our toes. Now, I've been looking for this data just like many of you, because I know the military space programs are out there. I know that. I'm requesting the records. I'm researching the technologies publicly as well as through these FOIA requests. And honestly, it's fun to escape the stress of our daily lives and dig really deep into these programs that have some kind of factual basis. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Do you? If you don't think there's anything wrong with exploring and explaining and discovering this stuff, join me. Welcome aboard. We will issue you a uniform, right? However, I'm not so far turning up very much in terms of evidence of this huge super secret space fleet. That does not mean it isn't there. After all, in science, in research, peer-reviewed research, we have a saying: absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because we don't have evidence doesn't mean something doesn't exist. Could exist. We just haven't found it yet, right? So that's why I keep digging deep. When we're saying deep dive, we're going down a few more atmospheres here, or in this case, going up. Now listen to this. I keep running into these dead ends and assertions by people without evidence by anonymous sources as well. And I'm sorry, but there's no there that I can prove personally for me, at least not yet. Now, listen to some of these problems again with this solar warden, and we're going to bring back into this now Gary McKinnon's story. Because I personally believe that when Gary McKinnon hacked into U.S. government computers, he saw something. That's my belief. I'm going to say that outright. I believe McKinnon saw something when he hacked in, period. Why do I say that? Well, I have a copy of the indictment on your screen right now, the indictment against Gary McKinnon. And so I know that he really did break into those networks. For a fact. Why do I say that? Well, on the screen, there's IP addresses listed on the indictment that he broke into. Groton, Connecticut, Patuxent River, Maryland, Crystal City, Virginia, Patuxent River, Maryland, Bethesda, Maryland, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, Wayne, Pennsylvania. I mean, look, you can't argue with that. He saw stuff. McKinnon saw stuff. He broke into Navy as well as NASA and other kinds of networks, and they were mad as hell about it. But let's understand a few things exactly. 2001, 2002, Gary McKinnon's sitting in his apartment, getting ready to cross the radar of the U.S. government. Regardless of whether he really hacked the computers or whether he logged in, to me is not a critical lynch point of this story. And the reason why is because they considered it hacking. That's what the accusation was. And we have evidence that that's what they considered it to be because he was indicted. Thank God he was not extradited, right? Well, 2012 USA Today report says this, quote, he spent about a year attempting to crack U.S. military systems, spending up to 8 hours a day at a computer. And then in a July 9th, 2005 interview with The Guardian's John Ronson, we get some more details. Ronson asks McKinnon, what was the most exciting thing you saw? And the most exciting thing that Gary McKinnon says he saw was, quote, I found a list of officers' names under the heading non-terrestrial officers. Ronson, non-terrestrial officers? Yeah, I looked it up, and it's nowhere. It doesn't mean little green men. What I think it means is not Earth-based. I found a list of fleet-to-fleet transfers and a list of ship names. Now, this is Gary McKinnon. I looked them up. They were not U.S. Navy ships. What I saw made me believe they had some kind of spaceship off planet. Ronson goes on. This is a great interview. He asks, the Americans have a secret spaceship? McKinnon, That's what this trickle of evidence has led me to believe. Some other kind of mirror that nobody knows about? Gary says, I guess so. Well, what were the ship names? Gary says, I can't remember. I was smoking a lot of dope at the time, not good for the intellect. Now, folks, hold the phone. I am not making this up. This is in a public, high-ranking search, Google search article by John Ronson in an interview that McKinnon did. And McKinnon wants us to know, with the Guardian, or at least that he approved it being put in the story, quote, he can't remember the ship names, which I don't fault the guy for that. And he says he was smoking a lot of dope at the time. I don't fault the guy for that either. I'm not judging that, but keep in mind that he was telling us that he was at least casually using marijuana, which this was also reported by USA Today in October 2016. And this, to me, this does not discredit Gary McKinnon because, again, he really did get indicted by the U.S. government, and whether he logged in or hacked, bottom line is there's evidence there that I personally found. So it does not discredit him. And I value and highly respect Mr. McKinnon's honesty. And the reason why is because we need more of that when we're trying to dig deeply into these issues. Because the more information that you and I have about tracing these origins of these stories gets us closer to, okay, well, maybe we can look into another area or go further beyond that, rather than using that particular anchor point as 100% true, accurate, and correct factually. And I need to also say that we know that marijuana, as well as alcohol, alter the senses in some way. That's why people use them. And clinical research done indicates that marijuana, as well as alcohol intoxication, can lead to memory issues, specifically in verbal memory, as well as what's called working memory. Did you know there's like all kinds of different types of memory? Well, verbal memory is exactly what it sounds like. It's being able to retain, encode, and retain in your brain pan words, speech. And then working memory is kind of like, I need to hold this in my mind because I'm trying to remember a phone number. I need to remember all those digits. And then I need to give you the phone number backwards. Right? So in order to do that, I've got to have a memory that's working on something short term, like really short term, and then spit that back out. That's working memory. Well, we know that through clinical research, marijuana and alcohol intoxication leads to issues with verbal memory and working memory. We don't know about permanent, but during the intoxication state itself. Okay? No judgment. Now, even McKinnon said that this pattern of behavior was not good for the intellect, and he also said that he was doing that while he was hacking these computers. Okay. Listen to what he tells Richard Dolan, and I want you to remember that he very well could have been intoxicated by his own report when this happened, and it might explain why he thinks he saw what he says he saw, and it might not. But more importantly, it might give us a little bit of a clue as to why there could be difficulty remembering such an amazing witnessed event, despite the fact that McKinnon was finding this stuff over the course of an extremely long period of time. Richard Dolan says, well, keep walking us through this. This is fascinating. You encounter these raw files of 200 megabytes or so, and what do they have on them? What do they show? McKinnon says, well, right, exactly. So I couldn't download it, so I had to look at it on the desktop. And once you make your link through the command console, then I ran a remote control desktop thing called Remotely Anywhere. It's a bit like using PC Anywhere. A lot of people use them these days, and they're for logging into their office remotely through your desktop. So yeah, it was a bit like that. This is McKinnon talking to Richard Dolan. And I couldn't download these images. I couldn't download them. So I just double clicked on one, just to see it there. And then on the desktop, because I had to know instantly what was there, could I confirm right there and then what Donna Hare had said? And I did. And it started to come. The screen, you know, it's very slow. Gary McKinnon talking still to Richard Dolan. It's very slow, shuttering down line by line. And I thought, crikey, I can't bloody wait for this. And McKinnon tells us, I turned the screen down. You know, it's still quite slow. I ended up, I think, at 640 by 480 resolution, and then I believe it was coming down okay. I was seeing it. And there was, McKinnon again talking to Dolan, there was what looked like fuzzy sort of gray at first, and then there was this lightning haze, and then there was the hemisphere of the planet. And then I'm like, this is it. I found it. It's the Holy Grail. Exactly what I was looking for. By the way, I'd probably had the same reaction. All confirmed, but with one story, because that's what I wanted. I didn't want to read about it or watch videos of lights in the sky. I wanted it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. This is Gary McKinnon talking to Dolan again. I have to keep saying that because I don't want to be flagged by YouTube as violating Gary McKinnon or Richard Dolan's copyrights. So, I love you both. So McKinnon goes on and says, I knew they were real and that NASA and the government knew about them. So here it was, and it go about 2/3 of the way down. He's talking about the image now of the ship. And there was, I assume it was the Earth. I can't believe the color of monochrome, but clouds, and then this perfectly smooth shell of a craft. It got to about, it got to just underneath it. Underneath its body where there were no rivets, no seams, no sign of sort of working on the stainless really, really smooth. But it did have the golf ball domes, the geodesic domes above and below. Let's keep this in mind here, that by his own honest report, Gary McKinnon with his solar warden, okay, now we're like, okay, let's look at the actual report itself. We already established McKinnon had nothing to do with solar warden, the actual phrase. Well, McKinnon had been spending hours staring at his computer screen. He's been using, at least recreationally, using certain mind and mood altering substances, and he's following the data in government computers. He clicks on a 200 megabyte image file, and he's waiting for it to come down, to render on the computer he's connected to remotely. All right? Now, while waiting, he gets impatient, as probably I and you would too, and he reduces the resolution on his monitor, on the resolution of the monitor, in order to make the image load faster. I could see that to be very reasonable. This guy, if he's on some kind of government computer, he wants to get off of there fast. They might recruit him, right? Shucks. Well, you know what happens when you turn down the resolution on your monitor? Now, keep this in mind. A 200 megabyte image is gigantic, huge. Gigantic. So the reduction in detail and quality would have been dramatic. Now, if McKinnon was in a bit of a purple haze, as I've heard can happen when people were smoking marijuana, it might not be too far off the mark to say that he may have mixed up NASA and Navy. So we know he hacked into both, or was in both of those systems by the indictment, the evidence on the indictment. Now think about that. If he thought he was in a NASA computer at the time, but he was in a Navy, a U.S. Navy computer at the time, and he stumbled onto a submarine image, which he then turned the screen resolution dramatically down on, he might have been very well have seen a very smooth, blurry, cigar-shaped object, right? I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here. And I've got this image for you that we put together, a 200 megabyte image in Adobe Photoshop, and this is a 250 megabyte satellite image, and at its native resolution, Notice that the whole image is 300 inches wide by 300 inches tall. Now, this is the same image reduced to 640 by 640, I believe it is. Well, the image is just short of 9 inches by 9 inches. And it's a huge reduction of data within the image. You take 300 inches by 300 inches, and now you're reducing it to 9 inches by 9 inches. Now, I'm just throwing that out there as a hypothesis to consider. I'm not saying that Gary McKinnon is making anything up at all. I think Gary McKinnon believes what he's saying, and I believe he actually saw what he's saying. But back to that super secret space fleet. I mean, ultimately, we're pretty curious about what's up there, aren't you? I am. Can we assume, though? Can we assume that the Solar Warden fleet is real based on any evidence? I mean, this kind of stuff helps guide your FOIA requests when they hit you with no responsive documents. We get this all the time. And it's, we don't have anything, keep digging, Buster. I see that as a challenge, by the way. When they say no responsive documents, I'm like, oh, all right, well, let's try it a different way. If there's 6 ways in, there's got to be 12 ways out, right? Well, in order to find this evidence, we need to look at the core elements of the Solar Warden report. In a nutshell, there are no less, but maybe more, than 8 tubular motherships, each longer than 2 football fields. These motherships are accompanied by somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 smaller craft in space, currently. The entire fleet is overseen and managed by the U.S. Navy, according to the story. And the mandate of the fleet is to safeguard the Earth from alien invasion. We can argue all day. I mean, you and I can argue all day, and it's kind of pointless to do, about how UFO sightings confirm or don't confirm whether we actually see these bigger ships. It seems to me that we'd see more of them with all the telescopes that we have trained out there on the stars, and I know that even amateur astronomers are seeing things up there. That is a fact. We have evidence for that. At the very least, I think we just have to agree that eyewitness testimony, as fascinating as it is, isn't going to help us to get to the fact of the matter, which is the tangible, confirmable evidence, other than the testimony in and of itself. Our senses are notoriously unreliable, so we can't just accept people's stories as evidence when they're making claims, because, not because they're trying to deceive, but because they just might be mistaken. And what'd you eat for breakfast 4 days ago? What was the color of the car that passed you on the highway when you were trying to merge over in the exit lane? What was the color of all the cars, or just one, that passed you in that left-hand side when you're going off that exit? Friday. Last Friday. You see what I mean? I mean, sometimes we just can't pull it. And that's okay. I mean, that's how we all are. There's a question in the chat room. Jim, hey, Jim. Old friend Jim. He had been, he's referring to Gary McKinnon. McKinnon had been exploring DOD computers for months looking for UFO evidence, and he suddenly mistakes pictures of subs for UFOs? Well, I'm going to tell you this. I didn't hear Gary McKinnon say that he found any evidence of any other UFOs for months when he was looking in DOD computers. Because if he found any evidence of UFOs in DOD computers, we would get more information than just the story about the one image, the 640 by 480 resolution image that he pulled down. He might have seen a spaceship. I'm just saying there's an alternative hypothesis, and that's kind of where I'm at with it. It doesn't mean that there is not a secret space program. Gary McKinnon might have found the treasure trove, and that's why they're trying to lock him up. But when we're looking at when we're trying to actually get more information, we need more information and alternative hypotheses to why things happen. are important to teach us something about our own conclusions when, for example, I come across a document and it says it's from the Air Force and it's all about orbital colonies and this and that, right? They fooled me too, and I got the documents, and I wasn't impaired or intoxicated. Like, okay, well, it's from the Air Force. It must be just declassified information. No, it wasn't. It's public. It was marked as unclassified, but one of you helped me out with that one, right? And that's the power of you. So our own bias, our own concepts can get us down a conclusion path that when we're trying to research and present things, we just, through the goodness of our own heart, we're just a little off base. And Breakaway Civilization in the chat room says, that was the image that got him caught, right? I don't know about that. I have a Freedom of Information Act request in with NASA right now that's pending to actually get a list of every single file that he pulled from their computers. So I don't have evidence to say one way or the other on that question about whether that was the file that got him caught. But I'm going to tell you what, when I get that FOIA request back from NASA, if they give me anything at all on it, we will see the file names that Gary McKinnon accessed, because that's legally used information. That's legal evidence that they had to have in order to indict him. They had to present that evidence in a court of law. So you better believe that there is somewhere a file name list of what Gary McKinnon accessed on government computers. Now, isn't there? So I'd be real suspicious and will appeal if NASA comes back and says there's no responsive documents. I'm going to say, yes, there are. Here's the indictment. Fist bump. We could be mistaken. Since we can't reliably see the ships right now today, all the ships that are described, we need some other way of moving past just deciding to believe or not if you're interested in exploring facts beyond the explained and not just believing, but finding evidence. We need to find a way to know. How are we going to get there? Well, let's just do this thought experiment. Would you join me, please? Let's just start with thinking about how the big ships were built. 2 football fields is pretty gosh darn big. So we can rule out that these craft, these huge Solar Warden ships, these motherships especially, were built on Earth completely because of the thrust to weight ratio. I mean, basically the heavier something is, the more rockets you have to strap to it. And the more rockets you strap to something, the heavier it gets, so you need more rockets. Now, in the case of a giant starship, well, you need a lot of rockets. Okay, and this is just conventional technology. I know many of you have mentioned to me about other types of things, propulsion systems, and I got you. I understand. I'm with you. I respect you. But just this conventional old-timey rocket technology, we could build, just to be fair, we could build reasonably sized sections and assemble them in orbit, right? I mean, absolutely we could. We do. The ISS, the International Space Station. By the way, it's supposed to be deorbited in 2024. Did you know that? The ISS was built like that. Well, that's what they tell us. So that gets us a hull. That gets us the HULL hull. We could shoot all the bits up there and bolt them all together, or even 3D print them out there, which there's a 3D printer on the International Space Station right now. It's been there for years. They're printing all kinds of things. That's public news stories. You don't even need to do a FOIA on that. I 3D printed these things for you. All right. But you could 3D print components in space. They're already doing it. They're 3D printing fiber optic cable up there now. Of course, with a mothership, let's call it, we would have to build a sort of whole infrastructure first. Imagine a sort of Navy base with a dry dock for submarines, only in space. You need living quarters, you would need command modules, life support stations, tool and machine storage facilities, and at least one hospital type module, and who knows what all else. And we also know through declassified Army documents that there absolutely was a plan for a military moon base that was fully staffed and crewed by 1965-66. The Russians had, as we opened up, I told you, the Russians had a plan for a military moon base around the same time period. The Chinese today, this year, have already planned for a crewed moon base. And I believe I've seen years put on there about 2028 to 2036. And that's their military, because the Chinese military. Now, let me ask you this. Why do you really think there's all this talk about humans going back to the moon? Especially from the American military, who needs our support on that venture, by the way. All right, so we got this whole infrastructure for this Solar Warden secret space fleet. Fine. But is there any evidence that right now something like that's going on? Well, there is a little piece of evidence that something like that is going on right now. Do you want to know something? Somebody posted an advertisement for a self-contained and free-flying orbital outpost. Who was that? That was the Department of Defense. That's who did that. Now, I did a video for you on that, and I'm going to touch on it here as well. But, yeah, the DoD's Defense Innovation Unit, they wanted a self-contained free-flying orbital outpost. Now, the bid's probably closed by now. And contractors bid on it. Now, first off, why would they need to solicit this if they already had a Starship building platform and infrastructure out there in space? I mean, I guess it could be a ploy, a cover story, right? More likely, this is actually the beginning of getting that Starship building infrastructure in place. More than likely, at least publicly. Why do I say that? Well, the solicitation from the DoD calls for a very small initial platform. Now, check out the specs. 3 feet cubed, literally 3 feet cubed, 176 pounds, 1 kilowatt of power that's continuous. This orbital outpost that's free flying, self-contained, needs to have about 100 kbps in communication speed and 0 to 1 atmosphere pressurization. But see, here's the part that really catches my attention and should spike a red flag in your gray matter too. This is what the DoD's bid says on this thing. Solutions must be established in low Earth orbit within 24 months of award and have guidance, navigation, and control for sustained free flight operations. Key phrase. Favorable characteristics include modularity and scalability. Modularity, International Space Station, and scalability. Already been done. Public knowledge. Now, what do you think that means? You think that maybe they're going to get a foothold up there that they can use to slowly expand until we've got actual barracks full of Space Marines doing PT in zero gravity? Well, as small as this brand new outpost is being bid on and being created, and DoD wants one, small as it is, it needs to have a human rating. 3 feet cubed. Well, if it was just going to be a drone, why would it need to have the human rating? No, it's modular. It's going to be scalable. They tell you that anyway. So if we assume that Solar Warden started in the early 1980s, that would mean that immediately prior to Solar Warden, or shortly after the beginning of it, all of that infrastructure would have either had to have been in place or was in the process of being put in place. Now we are using infrastructure based on the Solar Warden story. This is beyond Gary McKinnon's report here. The other components of the Solar Warden story that have been added on, because he didn't tell us about 8 motherships. He didn't even tell us about Solar Warden. NASA's shuttle program started in 1981. So in theory, the shuttles could have been trucking up parts and personnel, and through documentation that I've uncovered from the National Reconnaissance Office, as well as many other sources, including but not limited to different books on military space history, space flight by Michael Neufeld from MIT. The payload bay of the space shuttle, the specs for that were designed by the National Reconnaissance Office. And that's just fact. Fact beyond theory on that. So the shuttles could have been trucking parts up that were classified that we didn't know about for this Solar Warden thing, as it's described. Now, this all would have been terribly expensive and expansive. I mean, you'd have to pay to put the infrastructure in space to assemble the modules. You'd have to pay to put all the modules together. And you'd have to pay to launch these modules into space once they were put together on Earth, you know, all the little seals and all that good stuff. And then you'd have to pay to have the modules assembled into this huge hull created in space. Now, just for perspective here on cost, money. In 2013, it was reported that putting 1 pound of cargo into space would cost you around 1,000 American dollars. The largest aircraft carrier on planet Earth, the USS Gerald R. Ford, is just short of 1 football field. And it weighs about 90,000 tons. Now, that's so big that I can't even fathom that. I just can't even fathom it. But I'm going to do some math for you using these numbers, and you stick with me. Even if you're not so good at math, I've done it for you, okay? You can cross-check me if you like math and you're good at it, please. 1 U.S. ton is 2,000 pounds. Now, since the Solar Warden motherships, all right, are 2 football fields, you got to double the weight of the Gerald R. Ford to approximate. Because we're told 2 football fields, Solar Warden mothership, right? So that's 90,000 pounds, one of these, times 2. So that's 180,000 pounds. Now, 180,000 times 2,000 for the amount of the pounds is 360 million. Told you I was bad at math. Cross-check me. $360 million times 1,000. I don't, is that $360 trillion? $360 billion. This is a lot of money. Times 8, folks. That's $280 billion just to get the modules into space for 2 Solar Warden ships. That's not including the cost of sourcing the parts, sourcing the materials, or for the cost for the engineering and the labor to design and build the modules. There would be the additional cost, by the way, of paying to have them assembled once they were actually up in space. And this is using 2013 cost estimates for the Falcon Heavies to lift this stuff. A couple questions in the chat room. It wouldn't list non-terrestrial officers if it was in the ocean and he said he saw Earth in the background of the photo. Plus, why else would another country's government want him in jail? Okay, they'd want it. I don't know. I'm telling you, I don't know. They'd want him in jail because he cracked their computers. He says he saw Earth in the background of the photo, but he also said that it was a monochrome photo that was already, he had to put the resolution down to try so he wouldn't get caught. It's a 200 meg photo. And look, non-terrestrial, I mean, I don't know. I haven't found any references at all to non-terrestrial officers. I've looked, I'm asking the people now, the FOIA folks now in various different places, and I already have 4 times. Recently, last year, in the past year. And Are the oceans considered terra firma? I don't know. Some of you military folks out there, help me out with this. Okay, and then Jason, RSSP Authority, says they're being built on the moon. They very well may be built on the moon. I don't deny that at all. I've seen all kinds of plans for this. And then he goes, Joe, you don't need hardly any rocket thrust. It's using gravity pull and electromagnetism. Okay, and yeah, the moon's gravity is very, very different than the Earth's gravity, obviously. I mean, that's what they're telling us now they want to do. I don't disagree with you at all. I completely agree. And as far as electromagnetism goes, I mean, they don't need rocket thrust, but they show us that they do. At least that's what they're showing us. Now, if you've got evidence that they're using craft that don't use rocket thrust or that are using ion propulsion or some of these other advanced spacecraft propulsion methods, and you think there's some kind of anti-gravity engine that they're using, which I have the Freedom of Information Act request for that too, after seeing a patent by the United States Navy for the craft using an inertial mass reduction device. Okay. But if you've got evidence of anti-gravity craft on the moon and it's not somebody else's research and you've done it yourself, please present that. I mean, we want to know. We want to see it. I can only do so many FOIA requests. You and I are a lot more powerful in our knowledge and information if we kind of hit these buggers with many different points of inquiry, right? So it's a good question. I appreciate it. So we got these Falcon Heavies, mainstream story to lift it up, and it's $280 billion just to get the modules into space for 2 ships. Now, maybe we don't pay the whole thing up front. Like maybe there weren't 8 motherships online all at once in the early 80s. Maybe the fleet assembled over time as funding was available, with allied nations helping cover the cost. All right. Even if it's black budget money, which we know exists, there are missing trillions in the budget that we can confirm. We can look at that and we know it exists. And you can independently do that research yourself. Well, for something as important as several motherships and 40 plus supporting spacecraft, Solar Warden, the story, it's for something that important. Maybe it could have been worked out and kept up under wraps for almost 30 years. Maybe. In addition to logistics and funding, there's 2 other issues that we need to consider over here. The first is propulsion. If there's starships up there, they have to be able to fire up their thrusters or whatever to move themselves around up there. Because again, the story is they're protecting us from space aliens, alien threats. So from all the research that I've been doing, and like I said, I've been doing a lot, I haven't seen a lot of evidence that we've moved very far beyond the theoretical for most types of advanced propulsion. Hold on just 1 second. I need to show you something. I want to get something for you, okay? We're talking about advanced propulsion, and I'm telling you, I haven't seen a lot of evidence we've moved far beyond theoretical for advanced spacecraft propulsion. Okay, here's one of my sources. It's called Future Spacecraft Propulsion Systems, Enabling Technologies for Space Exploration. And it's by Paul A. Zintz and Claudio Bruno. It's a second edition. It's made by Springer. Look at this book. This book is written by legitimate researchers in this area, and they're talking about warp drives and all kinds of stuff. I am not making this up. They have photographs of Lockheed designed aircraft. What's that say right there? 64. 1990. All right? So I'm with you. Believe me. All right. Now, it's fun to talk about Tesla, and it's fun to talk about anti-gravity and what they talk about in here, all this stuff, torsion field generators and everything. And like I said, I've got the FOIA request pending with the Department of Energy on all the Tesla documents that we've heard have been stolen from him when he passed away. And I'm a big fan of Nikola Tesla, I'm going to tell you. And I got the FOIA request going with the Navy on this advanced spacecraft propulsion stuff. But I can't find yet clear evidence that any of these technologies are actually perfected, not to mention use by the military so far. And this Solar Warden mothership fleet story is supposed to be from over 30 years ago. Maybe even longer than that, because it would take long to build them. The other issue is, and this is probably the most important one, why? Why would we need a Solar Warden fleet? The story tells us, the Solar Warden story, we're told the stated mission is to protect us from alien invasion. Thank you, Cave Bear, for your super chat in the chat room. Very much appreciated. Dear Joe, the USS Gerald Ford is 1106 feet long. That's 3.68 football fields long. Thank you. Thank you for your correction. Displacement is 100,000 tons. So Solar Warden ship is, I believe that's less than 2/3 as big. Okay. Or maybe that's greater than. But thank you. Yeah, so I appreciate the correction. But why? I mean, if they're supposed to be protecting us from an alien invasion, well, we've heard this around in the popular alternative cultures, communities, I guess you could say. Oh, that's a bad word nowadays, at least on YouTube. Well, according to some folks, aliens are already here and have been for decades, and they may be. But that's billions of dollars wasted. If Solar Warden was supposed to protect us from aliens and we're to believe that aliens are here and have been, then Solar Warden failed. We wasted billions of dollars. Even if it's black budget, trillions of dollars, whatever, missing money. The other side of this is that science hasn't really found any intelligent life out among the stars yet. I believe it's there. I believe it's probably closer than mainstream science is letting on, but they just haven't found it yet. They need evidence. At least what's unclassified, right? So it kind of seems a little presumptive and wasteful to shoot all those billions of dollars up there for no real reason. But that does not mean it hasn't happened. And it also doesn't mean that it ain't going to happen. It very well could have happened, and it very well could happen very shortly in the future. I mean, it seems kind of bleak if you're looking at putting all your Starship eggs in the one Solar Warden story space basket. I got my spaciators on, right? But see, I don't think it's that bleak. The good news here is that we probably don't have to worry about Imperial Star Destroyers and the NCC 1701 standing sentry against the dark forces of Alpha Centauri. We probably don't have to worry about that. I hope the heck we don't have to worry about that. Don't you? I mean, do you want us to be invaded? Hello? And this does not mean that we do not have a space fleet of sorts that we can be truly amazed by. Public information, not needing to hack government computers and getting indictments. Look at this. Hey, check this out. Think about things like the X-37B orbital test vehicle. The military's use of the International Space Station. The, right behind me, this black craft, FT, is the X-20 Dyna Soarer, the dynamic soarer. I have a Freedom of Information Act return back with documents that were declassified, like really declassified, by the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO, all about the X-20 dinosaur, kind of funny. And then we also have programs like the, all the way over there, the MOL, the Manned Orbiting Laboratory, which was a manned orbiting military satellite that was designed by the National Reconnaissance Office that nobody knew about. Nobody knew the name of that organization. And this is back in the 1960s. Dinosaur, 1960s. MOL, 1960s. So, these are real and amazing things that we're told never got off the ground. Ha ha. I'm sorry, I don't believe that. I do not believe that. And these are real. And they're amazing. And we can learn about them and explore them and discover them and be proud that we are actively investigating and doing the hard work. Because it's fun. Believe you me, I want Solar Warden to be real. Heck, that's why you and I are drilling into this military Space Force issue to begin with. Because there's enemies out there, at least on planet Earth, that we know about, and we don't want some kind of foreign threat to take away our lives, what we're used to, what makes us comfortable. I kind of feel like some of these popular stories that go around about alien threats and things of that nature, it's almost like people that you hear talking about it, not all, but just a couple here and there. Nobody in particular, just one of the storylines. It's almost like they kind of are excited about the idea of an alien species invading and taking over the planet and enslaving all of us. This kind of ridiculousness. You know what I mean? It's almost like they want that to happen. I'm like, that to me is not productive. Not productive for our survival as a species, and it sure isn't productive for us going out and exploring space and experiencing that. People want to know what the cube at the top here is. I apologize. I was going to tell you about that too. The military has CubeSats. They have CubeSat programs, period. I'll show you my CubeSat. Would you like to see my CubeSat? All right. Well, I can't afford a real one, but I 3D printed a CubeSat. This is what a CubeSat looks like. See how he's holding it with his gloved hand and I'm holding it with mine. CubeSat. You can fit anything in there if it's small enough, if it's nano enough. That's to scale. Now the military's, DARPA, they got all these things. The X-37B stays up there for years. It's a drone. You got the MOL from the 60s, Dinosaur, and you got all these CubeSats now. But I'm going to tell you, I need to follow the data I've got so far, despite what I think is true about the Solar Warden story. And I cannot find a single credible shred of anything that's 100% convincing looking at primary source material to indicate that there is a fleet of starships up there described as Solar Warden story describes them, policing space around our pale blue dot. But there could be. I do not deny that at all, one bit. Thank you again, Cave Bear, for your super chat. You're awesome. After a recent Freedom of Information Act return from the U.S. Air Force, in which they collected hundreds of legit slides from various public space visionaries, including the United Nations, I am even more fascinated to go beyond the Solar Warden story. I do not want to be held back by trying to prove Solar Warden the rest of my investigative career, hobby, whatever. Now, You want to know something else? The U.S. Air Force, in the FOIA return that I got back, gave me audio of one of their planning meetings on the subject of space. I have found a ton of evidence for the many military space technology projects and programs that have produced amazing tools, some of which we've learned about that are in use today. Most people have not heard about them. And these things are really, truly helping us to boldly go where no man or woman has gone before, unless, of course, we just need to ask the right questions to find out. Click on this video right here to explore more and discover more about the Military Space Force.